The following audio discussion is from episode 9 of Astound's podcast series, AI and the Future of Work. Host Dan Turchin, co-founder and chief product officer of Astound, welcomes technology and business journalist Tiernan Ray to discuss his best practices for tech, what AI theories inspire him, and what these theories could mean for the future of work for everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. This is Dan Turchin from Astound coming at you live from Menlo Park, California. Welcome to another great episode of AI and the Future of Work. Couldn't be more excited than I am to have special guests with me today, Tiernan Ray, a longtime journalist. I followed his articles, his thoughts, his blogging for quite some time. Just really excited to get an opportunity to speak with him today. Tiernan, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Dan. Anytime anyone asks you, what's your background, it's like, how did I get here? I just woke up and what happened? I know some people, there's probably two people in the world. There's the kind of people who have a 5-year plan and they know exactly where they're going. And so when they get there, they feel like they ended up exactly where they're supposed to be. I just happened into journalism 25 years ago because I answered an ad in the New York Times to work at a newsletter called Computer Letter, which was preceded the Red Herring. We kind of did what Red Herring was before Red Herring was its own thing, and they copied us. But we did those investor dog and pony shows for like 2 days at the Hyatt San Francisco Airport Marriott, and multiple times a year for technology companies. And that was 94, summer of 94 I got started. That was just before Netscape filed for IPO. And so I just kept going. I've been writing for Smart Money. I've been writing for Barron's for many years, pretty much just about always about technology of any kind, including semiconductors, networking, massively parallel computing systems, software development tools, databases, operating systems, and now AI.
Fantastic. So we were opening up the technology time capsule before we pressed play on or record on the podcast. Tell our listeners, what's your proudest moment been as a journalist over all the years you've been covering technology?
Proudest moment, I think that I have once in a while stumbled upon something that was relevant and slightly ahead of the curve. Something like the death of Moore's Law was something that I was either at the same time or slightly ahead of John Markoff at the New York Times in declaring Moore's Law dead circa like 2015 or so. I'd have to go back and check. But yeah, feeling like I'd put together what was going on and it was still being debated. That kind of is the thing where I sometimes get it right, is looking at long-term trends in technology and saying, you know what, it looks like enough things are coming together. This is what's happening. So probably something like that, I would say.
So whether it's that example, the death of Moore's Law, or maybe like something you just published about kind of trying to quantify the intangible value of Google's AI intellectual property, talk us through your process for kind of, going from kind of idea to words on paper to, something published. How do you work?
I always just try to read a lot. I try to read so much stuff because I usually am surprised by cool ideas other people have. The whole ideas that came from economists in really in the 80s that are still with us about technology and who is a noise trader and who's a rational investor. So when I'm looking at public stocks, what do people value? How do they value companies? The whole concept that you debate over, are people actually rational, is something fascinating to me that is beautifully articulated by economists that I could not have come to on my own. And so what I usually try to do is, I know, my gut feeling, my North Star, or my high order bit, as Steve Jobs said, is that things that happen in engineering are true and they happen over decades, like Moore's Law, like artificial intelligence and deep learning developed over decades. They are true. There's science and it's not owned by any one person or institution. and everyone dips a hand into it at some time. So I know that's true. And so then it becomes, how does it materialize in the market? And it may materialize in the asset value of a Google stock, or it may materialize in the instantiation of a 2-year-old Silicon Valley startup that has grabbed some interesting part of, dipped a hand into something. But I always know that there's something true there that engineers have an insight into, and scientists. And then it's just, how does it materialize in the market? And I'm fascinated by, things like what economists see about those things I know are true. I know deep learning is true. And to an economist, it's about what is the intangible value in a company? What are the intangible capital of AI in a company? And that blows my mind. And I say, wow, that's amazing, because I know it's true that semiconductors are changing to process linear algebra to do deep learning, but I didn't think about it as an intangible capital. So that's something where I try to read a lot to see, how am I not looking at this that someone else is, and I can learn from them.
That was a good insight. It seems like something Wall Street will pick up on eventually, how to quantify that as an asset. So that's certainly germane to our audience. You write a lot about AI and how it's impacting work. Talk us through something that you've covered in the past, call it 6 to 9 months, recent past, that has kind of caused you to scratch your head with regard to AI and how it's used in the workplace.
I'm surprised by the fact that the public discussion is, everyone knows that self-driving cars are almost here, they think. And everyone knows that there's a lot of hype about intelligent machines that are kind of like people, and do they want to kill us or take our jobs? But the thing that I don't think anyone fully understands is, because AI doesn't have a theoretical basis, we don't really yet know what is the law of thermodynamics that underlies the achievements to date. And so we don't know what's going to come out of increasingly large amounts of data, petabytes of data, when increasingly large neural network models are applied to it. And so the whole open-ended process of statistics inside of a company, what companies trying to do a linear regression or a logistic regression on their data to find insights, for marketing, is a baby version that is going to look very different in years to come. And I don't think we know what it's going to look like, just because of scale. And so we have all these notions of AI and what we think it is, but we're really at the beginning of this, what still seems to be a big data problem, that we haven't even gotten our heads around the scale of what's going to come out of it.
In the space, we talk a lot about kind of the hype fear curve, or it's kind of almost a continuum, where one set of philosophies is that the bots are out to take jobs and crush humanity, and the other is that we're on the cusp of kind of an intellectual renaissance like we've never seen. All being attributed, everything on the spectrum being attributed to the rise of AI and machine learning.
I think, Dan, it's just science. I think it's science, and it's amazing to me the science is not being communicated, and the journalists are the first ones responsible for the failure. It's science. I mean, at some point in time, the computer people like Marvin Minsky, Alan Turing, their efforts came into contact with the cognitive psychologists, Terry Sainowski, Jeffrey Hinton, Jan LeCun, Yoshua Bengio. And somewhere in there, too, an amazing thing happened in the 80s, where statistics came in, and what Facebook AI scholar Vladimir Vapnik calls statistical learning theory, it crashed into statistics. And all of the implications of that are still being teased out, but it's science. I mean, it's not statistics, it's not cognitive psychology, it's not just computer science. It's something new that's a blend of all these things, and which is amazing. And I just don't understand why not more is not done to teach the science to the average reader. It's like, we've had decades of teaching Einstein and relativity and wonderful work on the brief history of time, by Stephen Hawking. And people do have, kids will talk about DNA. right? I mean, a 6-year-old, I overheard a conversation, 6-year-old was saying to his friend, his best friend, if my DNA were like a little different, I'd be you. So kids have an understanding in an early age that I didn't have of like DNA. And so there's an understanding of science, and it's only in this area of AI that we're talking about it like in weird folktale ways that are totally obscuring the science, and it's beautiful science. And I think if there was a discussion of the science and less of the mythology, there'd be a less acrimonious discussion, and it would be less sexy for a lot of journalists. And there would actually be a lot more common ground where it would be, hey, you know, these engineers, these scientists are doing some work with large data. Some of it derives from statistics, but it has a rich tradition. And some of it we don't know yet because we don't have the theory yet. But we're making progress, and we're all interested to see where it goes. Just as, you know, there's no enemies in relativity, right, or quantum mechanics. It's just interesting, right? Nobody says, Feynman was like an enemy of the state, and what was he trying to do to people? They say, oh my God, what a brilliant guy! He loved science, and he loved to explain it, and he was a nice guy. So it just surprises me, like, that the science isn't taught, you know?
I love the term beautiful science. We at Astound, we teach a certification course about the kind of the principles of AI that underlie enterprise use cases like what we do, automate IT and HR.
Right.
And I'm always amazed at the reactions about just how, you know, when we strip it down to the bare essence of, like you said, the science or the math or the statistics,
Right.
how, you know, I think it's very empowering to people who take our course and come in, you know, a little bit fearful, always leave feeling just kind of better educated about the fact that, like I said, at its bare essence, it's actually, you know, the concepts are pretty easy to comprehend. What argument would you make to, you know, let's say you're talking to, you know, a group of enterprise execs who are fearful about, you know, job elimination and,
Right.
you know, Skynet kinds of, you know, dystopian stories? What do you tell them?
Well, I don't generally tell them anything because they don't usually ask me that. They would ask like someone IBM or McKinsey. I would say, you know, if you have a place for science, there's a lot of benefits to come out of it. And automation is its own separate thing, right? I mean, there's been automation forever. You can discuss to what extent you want to embrace automation or not, but the science is something that in an applied fashion could be really, really meaningful. And like we said, a couple questions ago, we don't know yet with the scale of data what exactly will come out of that, because there's unknown unknowns. There will start to be, you know, independent variables and dependent variables that in both cases we just don't know what they are. You're looking at a bunch of data and you're saying, what am I supposed to be finding here? What is the XY correlation? I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to be looking for. And you can't do that on a day-to-day basis. A CIO can't do that on a day-to-day basis because they need to deliver results, which means finding the correlation of a definite X and Y. But maybe on their off time or as part of their career development or professional development, you know, they start looking and saying, there's other stuff in here to find. And that to me is like, why not, you know, and look at that and say, what could be the value here? Everyone else may have the wrong objective function. And maybe there's business advantage to having a different objective function than every other company in our industry.
Well said. So let's shine the spotlight on your profession. So many forecast the imminent demise of journalism as we know it. I suspect maybe you have a different take on it. What do you think the role is of AI in the future of journalism?
They can't make something yet that can write well. GPT-2 from OpenAI still writes terribly, even if you use, as far as I can tell, the 1.5 billion parameter model. And the New Yorker has this nice story right this week about text completion and GPT-2, and you know, basically it can't get right for the New Yorker, so that's comforting. I think that there is something about the distribution of language that is, we haven't figured out what's the right use for machines to master that, because it seems like telling narrative accounts is a fairly low yielding let's say, outcome of an investment in a text machine, a natural language processing machine. It doesn't seem like that's a craft bespoke industry for which, given there's diminishing readership at the moment for print, does not seem like a wise place to invest assets as an AI company. So I feel like it's kind of a moment that's going to blow over, where people are going to lose some of their enthusiasm for stuff that writes like a person. But the discussion that's been focused on fake news and such will probably yield to, there are lots of other ways for people to be fooled. So just creating sort of reasonable facsimile of texts is maybe not the threat it seems at the moment.
Yeah, we're just I think at a fascinating juncture where we don't really know what's ahead, and so we don't know whether to be excited about it or scared about it. Let me go through a couple use cases that are compelling to me, and just curious to get your reaction. Google and Amazon both are introducing services that will kind of use NLP to read back the news. Let's say, for people who are visually impaired, with kind of intonation and potentially even, you can pick the kind of tone. Is that viable? Is that a good thing? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it is a good thing. And it is viable. I will offer this thought, Dan, which is basically everything that happens with people with AI is something that's gamified, if you will. If you want to know why something works, it's because people are willing to participate in an activity that they wouldn't do otherwise, that puts them within range of a machine. And so if you're the model of 70 years ago, where somebody sits down on Saturday and reads Barron's cover to cover, is not well suited to a bot, because they're going to read Barron's maybe with a drink in hand at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. They're going to have football on, and it's just an activity that is meant for them to kind of ruminate and reflect 2 days before they go to the stock market. And it doesn't yield itself to a bot. But if you're looking at your phone all day long and you kind of have 2 moments to check in, it's almost like you're playing a video game where you're trying to score points by how much you can digest information quickly. And that's a great scenario for a bot. So anything that you can imagine that a person will do that's more like a video game, where you're scoring points, you're getting shit done, you're getting stuff done, that can be well suited to developing an algorithm that will interface to that and exploit that and take advantage of it and maybe help it.
Okay, so another use case. Let's kind of let's probe that one a little bit. I like that kind of that visual. What happens when AI is extracting a summary of, let's say, long form content? You as the author, is that a threat or an opportunity that maybe AI would summarize your content to be consumed on, let's say, a small screen device?
Yeah, I can't imagine. It's increasingly hard to imagine that anyone wants anything other than a summary, because it's hard to imagine people want to spend time with dense material. So probably, to the extent that they're spending time with a small screen device looking for a quick hit of something, then the summary may be the only option that people like me have to reach some people, because that's just, you've gamified the consumption of news. You've turned it into, I need to get it done. I need to score some points as a person, as a reader. I need to get my thing done, feel I've completed a task, check it off, feel like I've got a takeaway that I can then maybe take to another venue. I repurpose the takeaway as a cocktail talking point or with a coworker. So yeah, that may be increasingly the only way, except for, the 5 people who want to sit down on Saturday and just, languorously digest hours of content and think about it and feel the words and all that stuff. Yeah, totally. The summary may be the main conduit.
And would you feel a need to be able to review call it the bots, kind of using that term colloquially, but review the bot's summary of your content? Or what responsibility do you think the vendor of the algorithm, the summary tool, has to you to make sure that kind of integrity of your content is maintained in the summary?
I wish I could, but I feel that that's a role that is now increasingly over the Chinese wall between editorial and kind of production and distribution. It's like I, as a writer, have all these notions of how I should represent and be represented, but it kind of is in the hands of people who have a mix of social marketing and sort of syndication. And they do all those things, and they don't really want my input, has been my experience. So it's kind of, I might be lucky enough to have some input. I might not. I would love it if I did as a producer of words, but I have a feeling most often that's going to be an apparatus of people and algorithms that are on the syndication marketing side that are going to create how they want to present something. And right at the moment, it's SEO driven, it's search engine driven, and that may not last, but still it's the model of they're trying to plug this again into the gamified audience of reading. And at that point, my utility as a person who happened to write this stuff is to those people maybe kind of minimal from their perspective.
It's a very progressive viewpoint. So let's roll back the clock. So you're giving advice to a younger version of Tiernan Ray, a hotshot kid coming out of Princeton, newly minted historian. Knowing what you know now, what are you telling the younger version of yourself?
Set up a 401k much sooner. Like I had all these notions about, I don't want equity and stuff because I just never wanted to be responsible for stuff. But some of the things that you think about, it's like the software development curve. It's like, the beautiful thing about open source and all that was that you can write a tiny little snippet of code and it could become, it's like the giant ball of tinfoil that Pee Wee Herman has. It keeps getting bigger and bigger, and eventually you've got something called Linux, which changes the entire world. And you can kind of think about this with yourself. It's like, when you're young and people tell you things like, you got to think about your future, it's sort of like it's so imposing and ominous and threatening that if you didn't think about your future and just think about little things you can do, like, I don't know, maybe think about putting away a little money once a month or something like that from your payroll or something. And don't think about it as the entire future of your life. Little things can add up and they can make a difference for you. Little habits you develop, whether they're health habits or whatever. So take out some of the ominousness that older people impose on you by telling you to decide the rest of your life and work on small things, the way the software community makes small little innovations and iterates, and it can eventually change the world. It could change your life for the better. And if you just take away some of the dread about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good insight. So one last question. I want to make sure I had a chance to get this one in. So fast forward now, let's say 2 years out on the horizon, you and I are back, we're recording another podcast, and we're talking about how AI has changed our lives, professional, personal lives in the last couple of years. What is it that we're talking about?
Talking about some kind of a sample from your life that you can't do now, meaning you have some kind of, it's like a statistic. You take a sample of the distribution in your life, and there's a pattern that you know about your personal relationships or your own habits from morning till night that you have an insight into. And maybe it feels kind of like, I don't even like that thing on the iPhone that tells you, like, here's how much you've used the phone. Like, I hate that thing. I don't pay attention to it. And I don't really like the quantified self, like, here's how many steps you've taken. But some version of that in some way is going to hit the mark, that it's going to be like, hey, there's this awareness of my habits that I have that is a pointer to some pattern going on in me and the world that I would never ever have seen, like a big picture insight from my little window of my world.
Well, I hope that in 2 years we're back here and we're having that conversation, and we'll dig this one up from the archives and see how we did.
Cool.
Tiernan, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I feel like we're just getting started. Yeah. Everyone listening to this podcast, I encourage you to follow Tiernan Ray Tech on Twitter, and I guarantee you'll enjoy reading his stuff and learning from him like I do. Tiernan, any parting thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, everyone try and do one thing to be kind to one another on a daily basis.
Well said. Tiernan, thanks so much for joining. Thanks for listening to another episode of AI and the Future of Work. We look forward to bringing you another episode next week. Thanks much.
To learn how Astound is improving the employee experience, visit the website at www.astound.ai.